living your life with contentment. We live in a society which craves more, yet we are called to be content. And how can we be content when we feel that we need more? Lying on his deathbed, the rich, miserly old man calls his long-suffering wife over to him and says, I want to take all my money with me when I go. He tells her, I want you to promise me that you're going to put all my money in the casket with me. After the man dies, his widow goes to the funeral home and with her friend beside her. And just before the funeral director closes the lid on the casket, she reaches over, grabs a metal box, places the box upon his belly. The friend looks at her and says, but what are you doing? You surely didn't put all the money in that box. She says, well, I took all the money, I deposited it in the bank, I wrote a check, put the check in the box and said, if he can cash it, he can spend it. There you go, right? There's a disease that many people have here. The men with this disease can walk into the garage, they can look at a car that's less than 2 years old and think to themselves that they need to trade that car in for a new one. A woman can go into her closet and look full of clothes in the closet and think, I have nothing to wear. A person with this disease can look in the mirror and never like what they see and wonder how they ended up with their father's nose and their mother's hips. They should be careful not to visit their friend's new home because you may see that they have granite countertops and you don't have them, but you want them. People with this disease may look at their spouse and think to themselves, I really could have done better. This disease is probably the cause of many divorces. It's the cause of much of the financial debt that people are in. People with this disease can carry around numerous maxed credit cards. People with this disease can think no matter how much money they have or how much money that they're making, that they deserve more and should be making more. If any of these symptoms fit you, then you have this disease of discontentment. The disease of discontentment is an epidemic in our culture. We catch this disease early on in our lives. Advertisers have long thrived on the disease of discontentment. Advertisements and circulars and flyers and catalogs arrive in our mailboxes every day and every week and every month and every year. There are unending commercials on television and radio reinforcing the idea that you need new and better items. And even now they pop up on our internet and news feeds, on our emails and Facebook and other things. People look at those advertisements, something happens to them. They feel that they need this thing or that thing or the other thing that's in that advertisement that's caught their attention. They didn't know that they even needed that 2 minutes ago. We don't like to say it this way, but discontentment is the same as greed. Bottom line is that this disease of discontentment will rob you of your joy. You see, if so much of your life is spent on craving more and being discontent, you will miss out on so much of what's good. Perhaps today you're convinced that if you had just a little bit more of what you're craving, then you'll be content. Let me assure you that if that is your way of thinking, then it's wrong. Because there's always going to be something more that you feel that you want. Something more that you feel that you need or that you deserve. One day that thing that you thought that you needed so badly, that one thing that you thought would make you content will be old news and outdated. And there's going to be something else that you wanted. The illusion of gratitude is that we will experience it more if we get more stuff. People often desire more, thinking that more will satisfy you. The reality is that more will not satisfy you. The surest way to dull a child of the attitude of gratitude is to give them everything that they want. More is not always the best answer. When my kids were little, growing up, of course, kids want what they want. And I would say to them, You can want whatever you want, but you're not always going to get everything that you want. Marilyn Monroe was one of the biggest movie stars of her day in the 50s and very early 60s. She was envied by women. She was desired by men. She had the look. She had money. She had fame. But Marilyn Monroe died all alone by her own hand. Maybe if she had just one more movie, one more magazine cover, one more relationship, maybe that would satisfy her emptiness. Think back just 3 months ago. 3 months ago, we were in the Thanksgiving season. Thanksgiving is a time when we should be thankful to God for all that we have and we've got and what He has done for us. And Thanksgiving is also a time that ushers in the season of greed and discontentment, of desiring more. And now you've probably gotten those credit card statements from that season. I want us to understand that the disease of discontentment is one that will make us miserable. Folks, we need to resist comparisons. As Paul wrote in the book of Philippians, he was in prison. Life probably wasn't the best for him at that time, yet the book of Philippians is known as the Epistle of Joy. And I'm sure it was quite a temptation for him to sit there in jail and make comparisons. He could look out the window and look at his other preacher friends coming and going with freedom, doing what they wanted to do. And he would look at the guards as they would come and go down the rows of the cells, and they could go and do whatever they wanted to do when they wanted to do. He probably envied their freedoms. However, Paul didn't get bogged down with comparisons. Instead, he made it clear that he was content with where he was in life. I really believe that tells us something. See, we love to make comparisons with others. We look at their car or their house or their things or maybe their talents or maybe their good looks. We start to compare ourselves to them. We start to convince ourselves that we are as equally as deserving as they are of that nice house or that nice car or that nice, you fill in the blank. I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed too, that we always compare up, don't we? But we don't compare down. When we compare, we look at somebody and we think to ourselves how we would like to have what they have, or how we're equally as deserving as they are of what they have. Perhaps rather than looking and comparing ourselves to those that have more than we do, maybe we need to stop and compare ourselves down sometimes. And by doing so, maybe we'll realize how much we really do have. Perhaps rather than looking at the guy with envy who drives the car of our dreams, we need to start looking at the millions of people around the world that can't afford even the biggest lemon or clunker of a car that you can possibly dream up in your head right now. Perhaps rather than looking at the guy who has the fancy home longingly and thinking how we would like to have that, maybe we need to look at the millions of people around the world who don't have homes or a roof over their heads. Over 20 years ago, I went to Juarez, Mexico, with a group of kids to build houses. Juarez is just right across the border from El Paso. And a stark variance of lifestyles from El Paso, just 10 miles inland or into Mexico, you see. Yeah, they have homes, you bet. They have homes. Homes built on former garbage dumps. Homes where the walls are scrap wooden pallets, where they get 4, 5, 6, 7 pallets put together, leaned up. They have siding on their homes. You bet they have siding. They take cardboard boxes and open them up. They attach those cardboard boxes to those wooden pallets with a bottle pop that they flatten flat to make a washer and a nail that they found on the road somewhere. They have roofs over their head. You bet they have roofs. If they're lucky enough to find a third or fourth or fifth or sixth handed scrap of a tarp that they can put over, you bet they have homes. The men, they work. They have jobs. They work. They leave in the morning before anybody else is up. Most of them don't have a car because they walk miles to their job. They work all day and they come home at night in time to have a tortilla or two and say goodnight to the kids before they get up and do it again the next day. I've seen it in effect in our world. Someone goes out and buys a house and you ask them, how many bedrooms do you have in that house? And they say, well, we have 6 bedrooms. And you wonder, why on earth do you have 6 bedrooms when you have no kids at home? Why do they do it? Usually for 2 reasons. One is to be the envy of everyone else. And second is so that they can feel like they can treat their discontentment. We as a society often judge success by the size of a person's home and the type of the car that they drive. And I wonder with those standards how damaging we are to people in the long run. People will buy into the lie that their life has been a failure if they can never afford those things. Yet perhaps we need to compare down instead of comparing up. Maybe we need to start displaying an attitude of, it could be worse. Go outside and fire up your car and say, it could be worse. Look at your house and say, it could be worse. Roll over in the night and look at your wife and say, it could be worse. Maybe you shouldn't say that one out loud. When life is tough, when you're tempted to lose contentment, always remember, it could be worse. Folks, our contentment comes not from without, but from within. Warren Wiersbe said this. He said, real contentment comes from within. You and I cannot change the circumstances from the world around us, but we can change and control the world within us. Contentment comes from within. Not from what happens around us, not from our circumstances. The truth is, we cannot always control the circumstances, but we can control and choose the attitude. I can't always choose what will happen to me, but I can control and choose how I will respond. In World War II, Dr. Frankl was imprisoned at Auschwitz. He was stripped of his identity. He was a medical doctor before. He was stripped of his identity, and he was forced to become a manual common laborer in the camp. His father, his mother, his brother, his wife, they were all killed in the concentration camps. All of his studies and all of his notes and all of his memories that he had written down were destroyed. Yet Frankl emerged from Auschwitz believing this. He says this, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. We really have to believe that we have a choice in our attitudes. If we wake up in a bad mood, we have a choice to remain that way. The same is true with the choice of discontentment versus contentment. We have a choice in which attitude that we will display. Discontentment is not just a way of thinking. It's an attitude and a lifestyle. I believe our attitude can be one of contentment and thanksgiving if we will allow it to be. See, a lot of bad attitudes exist because we nurture them. And good attitudes are absent because we don't nurture them. In order for our attitude to change to one of contentment, we need to constantly and consciously choose to be content. For Paul, contentment was not based on the circumstances. In Philippians, the 4th chapter, verse 11 and 12, he writes this. He says, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. See, Paul could not change his circumstances. Paul understood that though the circumstances were currently bad for him, they weren't always bad. He had times of plenty. He had times where things were going great, and he said that he needed to be content in those times, but also in the bad times, he needed to be content. Why? Because, folks, no amount of discontentment is going to change those circumstances. A couple young boys were in a department store one day looking at bathroom scales, and one said this, have you ever seen these before? Yeah, my mom and dad have one. What's it for, said one boy. Well, I don't know, but whenever I see someone stand on it, they get mad. Yeah, I do. For Paul, he made the best of the situation. If Paul would have sat around in jail complaining and being discontent, envying all those who currently had more than he did, then it would not have solved the problem. And furthermore, he would have been miserable. However, Paul was not miserable. He was able to tell the Philippians to rejoice in the Lord always. Philippians 1:12-14, he tells them this. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace garden to everyone else that I am in chains. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. Because of Paul's situation, because of those chains, because of those suffering, others will be able to be encouraged to proclaim the gospel boldly and effectively. Paul said that despite something that others saw that was bad, it was really good. He was able to take a bad situation and make the best of it. He said that because of this perceived negative thing that had happened, the gospel had been advanced. The palace guard now knew about Jesus. And others were encouraged to preach courageously and boldly. This is all because Paul was content with where he was in life. All we can do is to make the best out of the hand that we've been dealt. We can sit and be miserable because of the circumstances, or we can use the circumstances for a positive thing. We need to be content regardless of the circumstances. See, the circumstances do not change our standard. The circumstances do not change the truths of the Word of God. The circumstances do not dethrone God or remove us from giving an account. Job was able to say, after losing everything and the circumstances were bad, he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. That's contentment, isn't it? Let's understand the most important truth in this message, that this contentment comes from within and not from the circumstances around us. A new car will not make you more content. More money, as nice as that would be, will not make you more content. I've learned that when I have a little bit, we desire a little, we get it, and we're not as satisfied as we thought we would be. We still want more. I really want you to believe this morning that you have a choice in your attitudes. If you wake up in a bad mood, you have the choice to remain that way. The same is true with an attitude of discontentment versus contentment. We have a choice in which attitude that we're going to display. Discontentment is not just a way of thinking, it's an attitude and a lifestyle. I believe our attitude should be one of contentment and thanksgiving if we will allow it to be. Again, a lot of times bad attitudes exist because we nurse them. And good attitudes are absent because we do not nurse them. Yeah, Paul made the best of his situation. He could have sat around in jail complaining and being discontent, envying all those who would pass by and could come and go free as they want. But it wouldn't have solved the problem. And furthermore, he would have been miserable. Paul wasn't miserable. He was able to tell the Philippians to rejoice in the Lord always. Do you remember the story in the Old Testament about the Israelites and the manna? God had provided the manna on a daily basis for Israel in the wilderness, not to punish them, but to sustain them. However, there comes a time when they collectively become dissatisfied with the manna. They want something more, some better tasting stuff, some variety. We deserve something else. And God provided them with quail. I read that and I think about it, and I think Israel was full of ingratitude for what God had done. They thought they deserved more. But God had provided them free food, free of charge. Imagine going to bed at night and wondering what you're going to have for food, and you go to the refrigerator the next day and it's full, and you eat to your heart's content. You go to bed the next night and you wake up again, the fridge is full again, day in and day out. That's a pretty good deal right there. Yeah, Dave Vandeman likes his food, you bet. Wake up every day and have a free fridge full of food. The Israelites didn't have to farm for it. They didn't have to work for it. Every day it just appears for them. What a great deal that would be. Yet they were not content with what they had. They convinced themselves that they needed and wanted and deserved more. Sometimes I hear people complain or hear people voice their discontentment. I think to myself, do we really realize what we have? Do we realize that there are people in this world who would laugh at our longings because all they want are the basic things of life? About 50 years ago, there was a 12-year-old boy named David, and he was born without an immune system. He underwent a bone marrow transplant in order to correct the deficiency. And up to that point, he had never been outside of that bubble. He was there every day, and it was to prevent bacteria and germs and viruses from invading, and it would take his life if he did so. He lived out his life without ever knowing human contact. When asked what he would like to do if released from his protective bubble, he said, "I want to walk barefoot on grass and touch my mother's hand." When I hear stories like that, I'm humbled and I feel guilty that my desires are for things and they are so trivial. Yet some people long for that which I have and I take for granted on a daily basis. Before we move to discontentment, let's count all of our blessings and name them one by one. I suggest that you sit down with your family. I want you to list the blessings that you have. List the big things in your life, your salvation, your freedom, your income, and your safety. And then go on. Also list those things which you may really not think about on a daily basis. Your material possessions, your house, your cars, your comfort, your sources of entertainment, your friends, all your luxuries. I believe it may surprise you what the Lord has done. We all have different levels of expectation. Those levels of expectation dictate how we respond to things. For example, maybe you're a fan of a certain football team, and a 10-win season and a bowl game might be a good year. But if you're a fan of another team, let's say had a 10-win season and go to a bowl game, you might be extremely disappointed. Why is this? Because there are different levels of expectation. I believe so many of us are not content because we expect too much. And generally speaking, the more we have, the less grateful that we are. Despite all that we have, we're still not content with what we have. The more we have, the more we're spoiled. To the higher standard is for discerning contentment. For example, maybe you stay at the Hilton. It's hard then to be content with Motel 6. Maybe you eat at a nice steakhouse, and it's hard to be content with Wendy's. If you vacation in Hawaii, it may be hard to be content with the camping trip to the state park. Perhaps we need to lower our expectations. Perhaps we need to understand how much we really have and to be content with what we have.